Hi everybody, welcome to In the Kitchen with Delightful Donna. Today we're making meatloaf and glazed carrots, so stay tuned for those recipes and instructions. Hi everyone, welcome to In the Kitchen with Delightful Donna. Today we're making meatloaf with a little bit of a twist. So first thing I'm gonna do is start chopping up my vegetables that I'm putting in so that we can get those sauteing, because those need to cool down a little bit before we can start combining out all the ingredients, because you don't want them to cook the meat from the inside out. So that's what I have here. I have some celery, so I'm just gonna get this chopping up. And we just want this in a small dice. So first we'll cut them in sticks, however big you want. If you guys like chunky vegetables in your meatloaf, then by all means go for it, because there's no worry about these not cooking all the way through because we're gonna saute them first. My family doesn't mind the vegetables, so they'll be slightly bigger. But if you have picky eaters in your house or kids that don't like veggies, this is a great way to sneak veggies into their diet. You could actually even grate these up so that they're really small and cook them down and they'll never even know they're there. So that's a good tip for you guys. Okay, so I'm gonna make mine about maybe a 1/4 inch dice. Listen guys, I'm not a professional chef. I don't have great cutting skills. This is just a rough cut without cutting my fingers. Okay. All right, that's cut down. So let's just move this over here on our board. And next, we're gonna do some green pepper. And remember, I wash all this produce before I start, guys, so everything is clean. And we're gonna do the same thing here, probably about the same size. If you don't like green pepper, don't put it in. If you could use red pepper, orange pepper, yellow pepper, whatever you have. You could use jalapeno if you want to spice it up a little bit. Whatever is good for you. This is just a basic recipe that my grandma taught me when I was young, and this is how my family likes it. All right, move that over with that celery. It's all gonna go into the same pan at the same time, so it doesn't matter if you mix it up on your board. And next we're gonna do an onion. I have a small white onion here. I'm sorry, yellow onion. And we'll get that peeled and chopped up. Okay. I use the whole onion because my family likes it. If you don't like onion, leave it out. Modify this to however you like for your family's taste. Like I said, rough chop, guys, because remember this is gonna get sauteed, so they're gonna cook down and get real soft, so it won't matter what those cuts are like once you put it in the meatloaf. All right, move that aside. And let's get some garlic going. My family really likes garlic. I'm gonna use about 4 cloves, but you use what you like. All right, let's get all this paper out of here, goodness. All right, let's get this garlic peeled. Just a little hit with the back of the knife. Lost one of my clothes over here in my trash pile. There we go. Give it a wiggle and the skin comes right off. And we're gonna chop these up the same. It's gonna be kind of a large chop for these. We like the way that the big garlic tastes in the meatloaf. Skin don't want to come off of this one. I think my hands are too wet. There we go. All right, let's get these others peeled up and chopped, and then we'll make our way over to the stove. Last one. Okay. So we're gonna give these a rough chop. All right. Now that all that's chopped up, I'm gonna make my way over to the stove, put this in a saute pan. I'm gonna use a little bit of butter and a little bit of olive oil, and then we'll get these sauteing. Okay, we're here at the stove. Let's get our pan on a medium-high heat. We want them to saute down nicely, but we don't want them to char. So I'm gonna put a little bit of butter and a little bit of olive oil in the pan. It's about 2 tablespoons of butter. Like my measurements. About 2 tablespoons of oil. We do that so that we get the flavor from the butter, but we put the oil in there so that we don't burn the butter, because the oil has a higher smoking point than the butter does. But the butter flavor is just so good. Okay, so now we're gonna put our veggies that we chopped. We're just gonna put them all in at the same time, everybody in the pool. All right, just like that. All right, and we'll get these going, sauteed down a little bit. You guys might remember from previous videos that anytime you're sweating down or sauteing some veggies like this, you want to put a little bit of salt in there to get that moisture to start coming out. So I'm going to use a teaspoon of salt. I use kosher salt. You guys use whatever you want. And that just helps them get going. And we'll cook them in here for 5 or 6 minutes and let them till they get just about translucent on the onions, and then we'll turn them off. Okay, they're sizzling away in here. You can see how they're starting to bring out some of that moisture. And that's what you want. That's gonna be some really good elixir inside this meatloaf. And now for a little twist, we're gonna give it a little more flavor. We're gonna put in some red wine. Whatever red wine you have. Just a couple tablespoons. I'm using just a red blend. Doesn't have to be anything fancy, guys. It's whatever you have. We rarely have leftover wine, but you know, I happen to have a little bit. So I'm gonna put that in there and let them saute in that wine for just a couple of more minutes. And then we're gonna let them cool for about 30 minutes before we start assembling the meatloaf. I'm gonna turn my fire down just a bit so I can reduce this down a little bit. I do want a little bit of the liquid, but not too much. We don't want our meatloaf to be watery. Okay, so we have about 4 pounds of ground beef to make our meatloaf. So our veggies have cooled. So we're gonna put our veggies into the ground beef in this bowl. I always use fine china. I'm sure you guys love that. All right, next we're gonna put 3 eggs. And I'm using 3 eggs because I have 4 pounds of meat. If you, I guess a standard meatloaf recipe is usually about 1.5 pounds of ground meat, and you would use 1 egg for that. So I kind of just, you know, calculated and used my best judgment. Next we're gonna put in our spices. I have a tablespoon of dried parsley, a teaspoon of paprika, a tablespoon of seasoned salt. I use Lowry's, you guys use whatever you want. A 1/2 teaspoon of ground oregano, and a 1/2 teaspoon of black pepper. And we're gonna put some breadcrumbs. I just eyeball it. It's really however much you want. So probably, let's see. Yeah, it looks like about 1 cup. That sounds good with my technical measuring. All right. And now, guys, is the fun part. You got to get in and mix, mix, mix. Just use your hands. I like to scramble up those eggs a little bit so that they get incorporated really well. But we're just going to get in here and we're going to mix it all in. Have your kids help you with this part. Kids love this. I know it gets a little messy, but they have fun with it. When my kids were little, they used to love to mix up the meatloaf. Anything they can do to use their hands, they like. And get it really good and incorporated. You don't want to squeeze your meat too much because you don't want it to be tough. So we just want to kind of squish it around a little bit, but don't squeeze too tight. We want it to be a loose mix. All right, so it looks like we're getting everything incorporated. Next, we're gonna put it in the pan. I don't use a loaf pan for mine. I know it's called meatloaf, but I've just never done that. I've always put it in a baking dish. I have one of these ceramic baking dishes. This thing is like, I don't know, at least 20 years old or more. And I love it because it's well seasoned, nothing sticks to it, it's great. Even cooking, similar to cooking in cast iron where it heats evenly. All right, so now I just kind of push it all together so that I get a kind of a smooth bottom, because I'm gonna flip it into this baking dish and then we'll continue to form it in the baking dish. But I want kind of a flat bottom on it. So there's that. Now I'm gonna flip it into this pan, like, baby, come out. It's stuck. There we go. Now it's released. All right, now we're just gonna push it into this pan and kind of form it the best you can inside the pan. That works best for me. If I try to form it outside the pan and then transfer it, it's gonna fall apart every time. So, and one little tip for you guys that I like to do, once I get it formed, I try to make it as even as possible across so it will cook evenly and we won't have any raw spots, or underdone, I should say, not raw. And I like to make a little bit of a dent in the center. Not too much, just a little bit. And that helps the center to cook evenly. And when it comes out, you'll hardly see that dent. I'm using Costco ground beef, which is 12% fat. But you guys use whatever you like. We like it pretty lean. A lot of people like to use 80-20. That's okay too, whatever you guys like. All right, I have my oven preheated to 380 degrees. We're gonna pop this into the oven for about 1 hour and 10 minutes. I'm gonna check it at 1 hour just to see, but this is a pretty big one, so it's probably gonna have to go the full 1 hour and 10, might even need a little bit longer than that. And then while it's baking, I'm gonna prep some sides and make a glaze that we're gonna put on this about the last 10 minutes of cooking. Okay, next we're gonna get started with making some glazed carrots as a side dish. But before we do that, we're gonna make a glaze for the meatloaf because we have about 8 minutes left and I wanna get this glaze on there so that it can be there for the last part of the cooking. So I'm using about 1/3 cup of ketchup. Guys, you know my measurements, sorry. Just a squeeze of mustard, maybe a tablespoon, not too much. The same of some hot sauce of your choice. I'm using Frank's, but you use what you like. And then we're gonna put just a little bit of brown sugar in here. About a tablespoon. I use the Splenda brown sugar because it's sugar-free, and so it's kind of extra sweet, so you don't need that much. So I'm just gonna stir this up. And this is gonna make a glaze, I guess similar to a barbecue sauce, but not so smoky. So stir that up. And it's all set. Now I'm gonna go over to the oven and I'm gonna open it up and just put this glaze on the meatloaf really quick. Here's our meatloaf. You can see that it's almost done. And we talked about just scoop the juice out. Remember we talked about that crease that I put down the center when we first started the meatloaf, and I told you guys you would barely be able to notice it once we were done, and there you have it. Okay, so I'm gonna spoon this glaze on top, and then I'm just gonna brush it out. Alrighty. I'm gonna get down on the sides as best you can. Okay, so now we have this spread out. It's pretty good on all sides. All right, set this out, and now we'll push it back inside the oven, and we'll let that go for another 8 to 10 minutes. And as soon as that's done, we'll turn off the oven and let it rest for about 10 minutes before we slice into it. Okay, now we're gonna slice up the carrots. I already peeled them off camera just to make it a little bit easier. So we're just gonna cut the ends off so we can discard those. And then we're gonna slice these on an angle. Listen, this doesn't have to be perfect knife cuts, guys. I'm not a chef. Oops, that one's too big. See, I'm not a chef. All right, so we're just slicing these on an angle. It doesn't make a difference in the recipe. If you wanted to slice them straight, go ahead. It just looks fancier. And then we'll continue slicing up the rest, and then we're gonna put them in a pan, and we're going to steam them first. And then after they're steamed, we're gonna make the glazed part. Okay, we're here at the stove. We're gonna put the carrots into a pan. I'm using a shallow pan, almost like a fry pan. It's my rice pan, but it's shallow because I want these to steam quickly. I'm just gonna take about a cup of water. Don't want too much, about 3/4 of a cup, I guess. Put the lid on, and then we're gonna put this on medium-high heat, bring it up to a boil, turn it down to low, and then let them steam for about 3 to 4 minutes. We wanna just take the crunch off of them because we are gonna cook them again with the glaze. Okay, the carrots are almost done steaming, probably another 2 minutes or so. Our meatloaf is done. I did check the internal temperature with the thermometer to make sure that it was done, and you want it at 160 degrees. And you see that that glaze is baked on nicely now. So now we'll let it sit here and rest for about 10 minutes before we slice into it so that all the juices don't run out. Okay, the carrots have finished steaming, and I just drained the little bit of water that was on them. There wasn't very much, but I did drain it off. Now we're gonna add a couple of things to this so that we can get that glaze going. So we're gonna add some butter, because everything's better with butter. It's about 2 tablespoons-ish. All right, we're gonna add a little bit of hot sauce. I use Frank's, use whatever your family likes. Not too much, it's just enough to give it a little bit of a kick. And then we're gonna put some of this brown sugar. Let me grab a spoon. And you want about a tablespoon, roughly. Maybe a little more. All right, and then we're gonna stir it around. And if we feel like, I'm gonna put the flame on, not super high, maybe medium, so we can get that glaze going. And if you feel like it needs a little bit more butter to get that glaze going and get some caramelization on those carrots, then add a little bit more butter. And you do it to your preference, your family's liking. I'll stir it around here and see what I think. But the idea is to get a little bit of caramelization and just get some color on those carrots if we can. All right, so we're gonna let them sit down in there for a second. And then right at the very end, we're just gonna add a little bit of kosher salt and a little bit of pepper just to give it, bring out and enhance that sweet flavor. And then we'll be ready to plate. Okay, so here we have it all plated up. So we have the meatloaf with that glaze that we made, the glazed carrots, and then some mashed potatoes that I whipped up behind the scenes. If you want the recipe for those, comment below and I'll give you guys a good recipe for some nice creamy mashed potatoes. And then for dessert, we also made off camera some fruity pebble cookies. You guys, these are so good. They're chewy, they're sweet, they're absolutely delicious. So I'll have the recipe for these on my Instagram. So don't forget to follow me there at cooking_with DD. And then like, subscribe, and share our YouTube channel, In the Kitchen with Delightful Donna. So let's give this meatloaf a taste. That's really good, you guys. That's really good. It's not over seasoned. You can taste the ground beef, but you really, really taste the flavor of those sauteed vegetables that we did in the beginning. That flavor really comes through nicely. And that glaze is a little bit sweet, but not overpowering. It's really delicious. Now let's try these carrots. Very good. I'm a big fan of carrots in general, but the butter makes such a nice little sauce on there and a little bit of sweetness from the brown sugar. They're really, really good. So like I said, like, follow, subscribe, share our pages, and stay tuned for more recipes. Thanks, bye.